Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our two speakers this evening. Genie Santiago is a musician, writer, community collaborator, and wellness and mindset mentor based out of Greater Boston. Their life and identity have inspired their mission to use their art to empower others to overcome trauma, decolonize the mind, promote sexual freedom, and stray from the ideals of self-hatred that society places upon us. Santiago uses their art and platform to amplify the needs of BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, and marginalized voices of their community. And joining Genie is Dalia Kinsey, a registered dietitian and inclusive wellness specialist with over a decade of experience working at the intersection of holistic wellness and social justice in public and private sectors. Kinsey rejects diet culture and teaches people to use wellness as a self-care and personal empowerment tool to counter the damage of systemic oppression. Host of the Body Liberation for All podcast and author of Decolonizing Wellness, a QTBIPOC-Centered guide to escape the diet trap, heal your self-image, and achieve body liberation, Kinsey continually creates wellness tools and resources that center the most vulnerable individuals that hold multiple marginalized identities. Please give a very warm welcome to our speakers tonight, Genie Santiago and Dalia Kinsey.
It's exciting.
Right. We were back there like hyping each other up. How y'all doing? Yeah? Thank you so much for coming out. Before we start, I'd love to, if we could just center ourselves. I think I also need it, just so we can get comfy in our space and feel really centered in our bodies. Would that be okay? If y'all could just join me, take a, just get comfortable in your seats, loosen up your body. If we could just take a deep breath in through your nose, fill up your belly, and let it out. Let's do that 2 more times. Can we do one more and then do like a sigh at the end, right? Yeah. Oh, that felt good. We're ready. I'm Genie Santiago. My pronouns are she, they, and this is Dalia.
Yeah, we're super excited to be here with you today. We wanted to touch on a little bit of why this conversation is necessary, but without dwelling there so long that we re-traumatize ourselves or bum ourselves out unnecessarily. Sometimes the reality of what is can be overwhelming. It's good to know what we're working with, but we don't want to get bogged down in that. This is more of a celebration and more of a starting point for looking for ways that we can be more compassionate with ourselves, considering the circumstances that we are all living in.
Yes, thank you. Before we start, I just wanted to tell y'all how we got here, why this happened. I'm a queer, fat, neurodivergent, multiracial, indigenous musician, holistic life coach, among other things. And I also have a history of eating disorder. And I had been triggered and traumatized when trying to seek help in the health and wellness industries for my body image issues, for my eating disorder, and I was just being re-traumatized. So I don't know if folks can relate to that when trying to advocate for your health and wellness and then being re-traumatized and re-triggered in spaces and then being discouraged, feeling triggered, and then going back to ways of self-harm or self-destructive. And I just went on Google and I Googled body liberation, body image books by BIPOC authors, and I stumbled across Dalia Kinsey's book. And I will say that it was the first time that I felt validated that my eating disorder, my body image issues were not just about me. Like, it was so much bigger than me. It was something that had been taught to me, and I was conditioned to feel this way about myself. And there was sections to do some self-embodiment work. There was workbook sections of it, and it was just really gentle. But in the beginning of the book, you talked about a little background on colonization, racism, the dominant culture. I'd never heard the term dominant culture before, and I was wondering if you could just share with folks what the dominant culture is in terms of health and wellness and how it pertains to BIPOC and LGBTQI+ folks trying to get health and wellness support.
It's interesting. If you look it up, you can do this with a quick Google search. Most of the planet was subjected to settler colonization. And true, there were many societies that colonized people prior to the most recent massive European colonization. But I focus on the most recent one because that is what we're still living with. That's what's affecting us the most. When you think about what settler colonization is, it basically is genocide and abuse with the intention of removing the original folks in an area and replacing them with the settlers. And in order to do that, because humans, generally speaking, are very communal animals and empathy is part of how we are made, most of us, you have to dehumanize people to treat them the way folks were treated during that time period. And so you see a rise in white supremacy during the transatlantic slave trade in particular. And you see people really jumping through hoops trying to illustrate this group of people is not quite human, not in the way that we are human. And there are a lot of pseudoscientific things that people came up with to justify the slave trade, for example, saying that it was good for Africans because they just have weak lung strength. That's just how they are. And by us working them hard, they're going to live longer. This is actually good for them. And this is part of our divine assignment to help these people out by trafficking them and destroying their lives and violating their children and everybody. And you see that so many of the pseudoscientific things that came up during that period are still in use. There are still folks giving separate tests to African Americans under that assumption that our lung capacity is not the same. You still see how all of healthcare is affected by these assumptions rooted in white supremacy that come from colonization. And when you're in it, because all of us are surrounded by it all the time, you may not notice it. So I know for me, I'm an elder millennial. In the 80s and the 90s, no one ever in a healthcare setting acknowledged that maybe some of my anxiety that I couldn't pinpoint where is this coming from could be related from the experience of constant racism, also being exposed to homophobia and transphobia, not fully knowing what words to use for who I am, but you know who you are surprisingly young sometimes. And when you are super young and you're being raised in homophobic environments, you are exposed to all this hateful talk about who you are, and it does generate anxiety. It took 2020 for the CDC to officially say, oh, guess what? Oh, racism is stressful. And stress is bad for the, thank you. And stress is terrible for the human body. At this point, I feel like everybody knows stress tears the body down. In some cultures, there's even, in some languages, there's a word for what happens when your heart breaks and then you die. That is a known thing. It happens. Extreme states of emotional distress sometimes have immediate physiological consequences. I mean, almost everyone can think of an instance where it happened to you. You got a terrible phone call. I'll never forget, I have Graves' disease. It's an autoimmune thyroid problem, and it was making my hair fall out. And one day, I looked in the mirror and noticed an extra large chunk was gone, and I just went, and I could feel the stress going all through my body, and the next day, head to toe eczema. Haven't had it since I was like 1 year old. There is a powerful connection between the emotional environment that we live in and how our body responds. So one huge motivator for writing the book was that being in public health for so long, all I ever heard was that it is the individual's fault and responsibility, whatever negative health outcomes they're experiencing. But the fact is, we all are influenced by our environment. And only recently are we seeing this being acknowledged more by folks who aren't being affected as intensely by this. Because if you are a racialized person, and when I say racialized, I mean some racial identities are treated as neutral. And you know exactly what that is. If you have never had to think about, oh, will people who look like me be safe in this city, be safe in this restaurant? Is someone going to yell at me? Is someone going to assume that I'm up to no good? Is someone going to follow me around the store because of the color of my skin? If you have never had to think about that, then you have a racial identity that is considered neutral in the country that you're living in. So in reality, when we look at what are we using to define race, it's not a real thing. It's not a scientific thing. This is a social thing. And if you doubt that, just ask someone from the Dominican Republic what it was like for them to take a flight and then their race changed, or somebody from Brazil, you took a flight and your race changed. Well, that tells you this is a social construct. This isn't really a real thing. But the consequences that you experience because it changes how you're being treated. It changes where you end up living. It changes how often you have terrible experiences in healthcare settings. That is all real. And so then we start to see huge differences in life expectancy, differences in specific diseases that are typically influenced by stress. But what you usually are going to hear, you should just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Yeah. That's a very...
Go outside.
Yeah.
Get some sun.
Yeah.
How many times I've heard that? And I love outside.
Yeah, that's the other thing. If you're in a larger body, everybody assumes you've never heard of exercise.
That part.
Yeah. What's exercise? I don't know what that is. Mm-hmm. Or they act like you don't have a mirror at your house and you're not aware that you're a person of size. The truth of the matter is, bullying people and treating people poorly, that doesn't lead to anything positive under any circumstances. So when we demonize a body, regardless of the reason why, whether we're demonizing a body or pathologizing it because we think it's too big, we think it's too brown, we think, the list goes on and on and on, you will experience a difference in health outcomes, not because that part of your identity was actually a problem, but because the treatment you receive changes everything.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I'm sure many people in this room can relate to that, of going into the doctors and having these health issues and always hearing, oh, it's because you're fat. Like everything I went in there was because you're fat and you need to eat better. And me telling them, well, I work out 5 days a week, I eat really well, let's do some blood tests. So I had to fight just to get blood tests done. And when the blood tests come back, I've heard a doctor say, oh, you have skinny blood, like skinny test results. So I guess now we can look further at your issues, where I felt like if someone who looked a little different than I was went in there with the same issues would have received different care. And talking about chronic stress and your body going into fight or flight mode when you're stressed and releasing hormones like adrenaline and other stress hormones, that happening all the time, it can really jeopardize your health on the long term. And I think that people are not really understanding that. And what's being taught in the health sciences and wellness sciences is not for everyone. Like a simple thing as bruising on darker skin doesn't come up. And also identifying different types of skin cancers, eczema, rashes are really studied on lighter skin. And when we're talking about chronic stress, I just wanted to hear a little bit more about how that affects the physical body, especially in LGBTQIA+ folks and BIPOC folks.
Yeah, when you're navigating multiple marginalized identities, you're going to have even more trouble finding a sense of belonging in the world. And we all need that. And connection and community has been proven to be protective, which is why you can have two people who maybe have adverse childhood experiences, but they had a mentor or maybe one older family member that they could rely on, and it made a huge difference in their physical and their emotional health. But if you find that because you are a racialized person and you're also queer and you're also gender nonconforming or gender expansive, then you have to do more work to find spaces where you can just be and express the fullness of your humanity. So I've gone into plenty of Black spaces thinking like, oh, it's gonna be great. We're all gonna get along. I'm gonna be treated like a complete human being, and then they turn out to be super homophobic or just over the top transphobic. And once again, you're back to the starting board, like trying to find a place where you can just relax and stop having to be hyper vigilant. When you mention the stress hormones, cortisol in particular, I mean, that will trigger cravings. And a lot of us, if we don't have access to coping mechanisms that are always supportive, it only makes sense that we're going to turn to whatever coping mechanisms our body can generate or come up with. So with disordered eating, restrictive eating even, could help you mute your experience of intense emotions. And so that could explain why, although a lot of times in my field in particular, people assume anyone who has an eating disorder drive for thinness, that's the only reason. No one thinks like, oh, what if this person is just hanging by a thread because of how intense the levels of stress they experience are. Like let's say you're a trans person and you really want for people to see who you are, but because people feminize fatness, you feel like, oh, well, how will people recognize me as a non-binary person if I've still got all this booty? Will people see me for who I am? So then that could be a trigger. But then also just constantly being misgendered, constantly being blocked from opportunities, that stress may be another reason why you desire that muted, that less intense experience of life and of feelings in general. And then on the other end of that spectrum, everybody knows and everybody's body knows that food can be really soothing. And so you may find that you don't eat for hunger anymore. You eat for the relief that it gives you. But you have to keep on doing it and keep on doing it. And eventually it becomes something that should have been supporting you, making you feel better, turns into yet another source of stress. I collected some stats, and there's a decent amount of information out there, but not nearly as much research as there is for folks who have celebrated identities. And you can see the dates on some of these studies. This is fairly recent that people are like, oh, hey, guess what? Maybe it's society that is making a difference in suicide rates for folks who are experiencing racism and discrimination. And you hear a lot of rhetoric about people being overly sensitive, but when you measure it in this way, this is not an individual or personal failing. This is a human response to essentially being made to feel like your position in the world is not secure. It is I just can't imagine anyone who doesn't have some level of like sociopath traits not having that experience, because it's just so normal for humans to need community. So thinking that it's your fault and that you should just get over it, which I can't even count how many times I was told that in therapy in the early aughts. Like, oh, well, what do you mean that, like telling a therapist about a microaggression and how it gave me rage or it made me feel like I'm never going to be able to have one day of peace if I have to leave the house. Well, if you know who you are, why does it matter what other people think? Well, it does matter. This is a human thing. Maybe you should look into getting some more training dealing with people who are constantly being treated poorly. This is not a personal failing to be affected by this sense that you don't belong or you're not safe.
Yeah, and I think it has a lot to do with like how you're conditioned, like you're saying, right? A lot of us have been conditioned, and a lot of us who have marginalized identities have been conditioned to neglect our well-being, to neglect our needs, because our value only came from the output, what we could do for others, right? And so we also have that, the way we've been conditioned, our own lived experiences causing trauma, and then the experiences of our ancestors also. And I know you and I talked a lot about that, you know, sharing stories of how there is a lot of mistrust when it comes to health and sciences because of stuff that has happened to our own ancestors, specifically my Indigenous and Latino ancestors and your Black ancestors and your Latino ancestors, and even in this country and how it's still happening. And even for, you were talking about Serena Williams, also you were sharing with me about her experience, right? Like going when she was pregnant and having a baby, and also my relatives also came to this country from Puerto Rico and were sterilized without their consent, were forced to sign things so that they wouldn't procreate in this country. And so I wanted you to share more about that.
When we hear things like that, I think a lot of times, because such an intense effort has been made to suppress our history, folks who are not related to people who've been treated that way, it sounds shocking, and the assumption is that must be an isolated incident.
Or in a different country, not here.
Right. But this is the problem with people being able to remove the accuracy from what people are being taught in school, not even just public school, also in university level settings. There is this real desire to pretend that this country doesn't exist because of genocide and human trafficking. But that's how it started. That's how even the practice of gynecology, enslaved women were experimented on without anesthesia. The lie that people told themselves at the time was that Black people were like impervious to pain, because the assumption was, well, if we're doing all this to them and they didn't just like burst into flames or whatever, then they must not be feeling it. But we know that that's not true. Black people experience pain like everybody else. But even now, you still will find, I certainly find in healthcare settings, if I need additional painkillers, everybody acts like I'm there just trying to get a hit or something.
Yeah, that happened to me recently when I dislocated my elbow. I was telling you, some of you probably know me in here and know that I dislocated my elbow in the summer, and it was a really, had to advocate for myself, and my partner had to advocate for me to get pain meds, and that has happened to me several times because they're thinking that I'm lying or that I'm an addict, but even still, right, that feels really gross too, because I'm like, well, people need what they need, like, but even having a baby and trying to advocate for yourself of feeling like something's not right and them not listening to you as a person of color.
Right. What I would constantly hear when I was working with the Women, Infants, and Children program, there were all these assumptions that because Black maternal health outcomes were so poor in comparison to their white peers, the assumption was, oh, well, these Black birthing folks must be doing something wrong. Oh, they're not eating right prior to the pregnancy or whatever. The assumption is always we have to figure out what they're not doing correctly. It was never, oh, what if no matter how much money you have, no matter how fit you are, could you get any more fit? Right. Could you get any more well-to-do? She still almost died in childbirth because people would not listen when she was explaining that she was experiencing pain. I have known people that I thought were definitely going to be coming home after they delivered their baby, and they did not. And in hindsight, the family can say, well, she kept saying, like things that in hindsight indicated she had internal bleeding and no one would listen to her, but we didn't know how to make anybody listen. Constantly blaming the individual and refusing to acknowledge that it doesn't matter how much money I have, I cannot insulate myself from the experience of racism. You cannot get away from it, and it does make people ill. There's a lot we can do to make ourselves stronger and really treat ourselves well, but you're never gonna be told, well, maybe now, maybe in 2023, somebody will tell you, but I have never been told in a healthcare setting what I need to do is less. What I need to do is take care of myself more. What I need to do is set boundaries. What I need to do is when I experience a microaggression, say something about it, because if I don't, it's going to keep on eating at me. What I need to do is be careful about what containers I go into. I don't need to be in an office where everyone keeps asking me to explain my humanity. That will tear you down. But that is exactly what we have to do.
I think even going into a healthcare setting by yourself can be really dangerous as well. And I've noticed that there is such an importance in someone going with you, someone that you trust, someone that you love, to be able to advocate for you. Because in those moments where you're feeling so stressed and maybe triggered in that environment and you're focusing on your body going through whatever it's going through and needing someone to advocate for you, but then, you know, if it's another person of color, and then are they still gonna be listened to in that moment? When I was recently in the hospital, I was looking at all the people, like I was on a gurney in the middle of a hallway, and there were so many people that were by themselves. And if I didn't have someone with me that was advocating and being like, I need medicine, what's happening, how long's my wait, I wouldn't have known, because people just pass you by. And so when I'm thinking about, we need someone to advocate for us, right? But then being seen as, you're just like a crazy Latina, you're an angry Latina, right? We get that a lot as Latinx folks in here. Probably some of us can relate to that, of being like, you're too fiery, you're angry, and feeling that fear of advocating for ourselves in those settings, even when someone is with us. And then it's like even more amplified, right? And now we're dangerous because now there's more of us.
Right. That's a tricky one, but I know I've heard from, I recently went to an event that was for transmasculine folks who are also the birthing parent in their family. And hearing the stories of the absolute ignorant, horrific things they have had to deal with while going through the process of having a child as a person that people are reading as masculine, horrendous. But every single person said, had they not had their family with them, and in a lot of cases, that's going to be your chosen family, because who knows, maybe your family put you on the adoption block the minute you decided to actually be yourself. That was what saved their lives. So understanding that when we're forming community, number one, I think it's important to understand our relationships should be reciprocal. I understand sometimes our bandwidth can be limited, but it's just so important to be with people who know that we will survive as a community, and in isolation, it's just too hard. You really need somebody there to back you up. And I've been working a lot lately on giving myself permission to be perceived as angry, because it is ridiculous how I can not be feeling triggered or charged at all, and everyone is like, calm down. So I'm like, you know what? That is a you issue. I cannot allow that to dictate my behavior. There is something called righteous indignation. Why can't I be angry? Why can't I be angry? Oh, because I have a uterus, I'm not allowed? Or because I'm melanated? Like, which is it? Both of those are a problem for me. But that is something that you actually have to work through, because the socialization goes so deep. Because not only are you dealing with internalized hypervigilance or fear that you may have inherited from your ancestors who went through horrible things, it actually can change your gene expression, what you go through as a birthing parent. Sometimes you'll see what the birthing grandparent went through has changed gene expression in the generations that followed. So if you feel like, it's so strange, like everybody in my family seems to be getting treatment for depression. Well, what happened to the people 2 generations back? That's probably perfectly normal reaction to what they went through. Oh, you feel like you're hypervigilant, your head's always on a swivel. Well, what happened to the people 2 generations before you and then before them? So some of it could be how our parents and older people raise us to be aware in an attempt to protect us, but some of it is also our bodies have changed in hopes of making us more likely to survive.
Yeah, because our bodies actually do store the negative and do pass it on to us, and as a way for survival. So those joyous moments, the joy that we feel as a collective, goes unnoticed in the body. Like, it's not stored in the ways that negative experiences are, and a lot of that can be passed down. And I'm thinking about folks who are adopted and don't really know where they came from or who they came from, and don't really have those stories. Like for me, stories of trauma have been, orally passed down to me, and I've seen it happen to my mother and my father, and but for some folks, that can be internalized still, even if you don't know those stories. And so I think about that a lot.
It's really interesting to me how some of us perceive trauma. Like, we think that maybe what we've been through is not big enough or serious enough. Like, my reaction is invalid. I should just get over this. But trauma is not a thing that happens to you. It is something that was too much to handle in the moment. And so you and your sibling could go through the same bad experience, but they felt like they had the bandwidth to handle it and you did not. Maybe you were both in the same car accident, for example. You thought you were going to die. That didn't cross their mind. You could be fully traumatized. You can't drive in the rain anymore, and they are not understanding what happened. So giving yourself that compassion that your feelings are valid, it does not matter if you can't remember anything that happened that would explain why you're struggling. I know when I first started going to therapy, I was genuinely confused. I'm like, I don't know what this rage is about. Like grinding my teeth at night to the point of breaking teeth. I'm like, I don't know. What am I so angry about? I'm like, I think my childhood was fine. Where is this coming from? And in the end, it's like, oh, like literally the entire world, and then also inherited trauma. And I've been trained to not say anything about when I experience a microaggression, because then, like you said, people will say you're being aggressive or you're being a snowflake and you're being hypersensitive. But it has been measured that after people are exposed to a microaggression, they have strong reactions, depending on the person, of course. You cannot compare your experience to anyone else's. Your gene expression is unique to you. It's different from your siblings. You cannot compare your experience to somebody even from like a different part of the country, because maybe some of us grew up in an area where we were around enough people who were receiving the same type of abuse that we got validated all the time. And some of us have not ever had our experience validated, and we've been thinking this whole time it was our flaw that we didn't know how to swallow all of our feelings. But the issue with suppressing feelings is they never disappear. All they do is like go under the surface for a little while, and they pop back up in other more violent ways sometimes. So the compassionate thing to do for ourselves is to allow ourselves to experience our feelings and to say what we need to say. But you also have to remember that if you are not someone who is socialized male, you've never been told that it's important for you to speak your mind. You've been told that your top priority is like, be cute. Look like you're ready to enter into some sort of hetero situation at any time. And those are basically, like, that's your full responsibility. It's not to be a person who has a full emotional experience. It is normal to have ups and downs emotionally, but some of us have been socialized to only greenlight certain types of feelings.
A lot of times to make other people feel safe, right? To make other people feel okay with you. A lot of what we do is to make other people feel okay with how we're showing up. And I always tell folks that I'm working with, and my clients, that it's okay to feel your emotions, that they are valid. And a lot of what we are feeling we've been conditioned to feel this way. We've been conditioned to suppress this. But what you were saying about suppressing these emotions and suppressing these experiences is that they are going to show up later. Our body is storing this information. And so whenever it feels triggered, it goes into that fight or flight mode because it thinks you're in the same situation again. And so it's like training ourselves and reminding ourselves and connecting with our bodies to remind us that we're not in that same situation. If we are, how do we work through that, right? And the issue is that a lot of times that we go to healthcare providers, we go to wellness practitioners looking for that help and not feeling supported and being re-traumatized and re-triggered. And so it's really like we have to work extra hard to find folks that feel safe, that understand and have the knowledge and have almost unlearned what we've been taught. Because I know a lot in your book you talk about internalized white supremacy and how even POC and other marginalized identities have internalized white supremacy, how we treat ourselves, how we treat the planet, how we treat others. And so I wanted to move into like, what is wellness? And, especially for marginalized identities like QT-BIPOC folks.
Back in the day, like I would say 50s, 40s, maybe in the 80s too, we kept hearing people define wellness as the absence of disease. Number one, that's pretty ableist, so boo. And then also, that's not what it is. It is a tool that you can use to do whatever is meaningful to you. So anything that gets in the way of that is a problem. So constantly having to deal with people asking you to prove that you're a human or perform humanity based on a really Eurocentric standard that may not feel natural to us, that is a weight that you're carrying. And if the way you've been taught wellness can be presented to others is just through having a small body, then that becomes another stressor, because body weight is not something we have direct control over, no matter what you've been told. everybody has either a friend or it's you who tried to lose 5 pounds a million years ago, and now you're up from there. We'll just say that. That is the body's natural response to artificial suppression and control. It is that lack of trust of the body that also is largely inherited from settler colonizers, because most indigenous cultures, that's not a thing. You work in harmony with nature, and your body is an extension of nature, and you're taught to trust the wisdom of the body. But because all of us are a little disconnected, not totally disconnected, but we've become something different from what our ancestors were. Like we were talking about earlier, we're all hybrids at this point, and we really can't go back. I mean, something about that makes me really sad, but I've been working with just accepting the reality of what is, that we cannot be exactly as our ancestors were before all this happened. We can't unbake this cake. Plus, most of us are a blend of the colonizers and the colonized as well. Even when you try to deny it and you see your ancestry results, and you're
we were just talking about that backstage, talking about specifically the Latinx experience and being like this created race almost, and that we are like a new people. And we are a direct result of colonization and a science experiment of creating the master slave, which was supposed to be indigenous and Black, and this forced procreation of this. And I love that you brought that up, because I was like, yes, these hybrids, right? And when we think about wellness, like wellness is sold to us. And I don't know about y'all, but when I hear wellness, this picture comes to mind of what wellness is, and it's usually a thin, able-bodied person with like wavy hair, and is just like in Bali with like a waterfall behind them. And I'm like, well, I can't access wellness because I don't have money to be going to Bali. I'm not like thin-bodied like this. My hair is not down to I could buy it. It's not down to my knees, like wavy, blowing in the wind. And I feel like our wellness is being sold back to us. Our medicines are being sold back to us. And so feeling like wellness is not accessible to us, but yet it's our medicine and our ways of life from our ancestors being sold back to us with a different face.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you don't trust nature at all, and you see this a lot in the whole high-end part of the wellness industry now. There's all of these different tools to read what the body is telling you. But so many of these things, a lot of people who feel connected to their body can just feel when it's happening. So it's not that there's anything wrong with these tools, but they're not available to everyone. And I would say there is something wrong with a tool that is going to interrupt your relationship with your body. So that's one of the reasons why I hate dieting so much, is because it trains you to ignore what your body is telling you. And you get more information from your body, accurate information about what you need in real time, than anything else. But if you're worried about like how many steps exactly did I take, well, why can't you just wait until your body says like, ugh, we're about done walking? Or, I don't know, something feels like it's getting overworked, it's time to stop. What's wrong with building that skill? Well, if you're here in the United States, the problem with that is I can't charge you for that. So why would I teach you that? Not me personally, but in general, there's no money to be made there. So that's why we're always going to see this push to direct your attention outside of the body to figure out what you should be doing. But the truth of the matter is, your body gives you real-time info. Your calorie needs change every single day based on what you're doing. You don't need the same amount of food on the day that you laid in bed all day because you have the flu versus the day you're running around playing with your, the little kids in your family for hours and hours. But if you're constantly thinking, oh, I should eat by this schedule some dietitian gave me, or this isn't my eating window, I'm not allowed, that's what I have a problem with.
Yeah, it creates that mistrust in the body, right? And you talk a lot about in your book about intuitive eating, and I've learned how to do this as well, listening to my body while I'm eating and making other choices for myself and listening, because my body's going to tell me what I need. My body has this ancient wisdom within it, and wanting to connect with that and getting away from like capitalism, and also dietitians that have are not in touch with my culture and my culture foods, and telling me that I should eat like peas and chicken. That's fine, but my ancestors weren't eating peas, and so
I'm just tired of them trying to take everybody's rice away.
I'm gonna eat my rice. I eat my rice. I don't care. But then poisoning our rice, right? And being like, oh, it's not good for you. But yes, like culturally not being aware as well of what we know what we need, listening to our bodies, and that's why I love the worksheets. Not the worksheets, but individual working, the exercises in your book, because it made me really think about thinking about myself, connecting with my body, and what are the choices that I'm making. Are they serving me? Are they making me feel well? Instead of what someone else is telling me, like, you need to eat this much in the morning. These are the foods. I don't like yogurt. I don't want to eat that. So, giving me the specific that have nothing to do with my culture, have nothing to do with my dietary needs, and what I want. Like you were saying, what am I doing that day? I'm just, as you can hear, I'm getting over a cold. I'm at the tail end of it, and I just wanted like soup and like broth, right? But I don't want that when I'm out working out. Right now I'm like, oh, I want rice and I want all these different vegetables, and that creating that trust within the body, because our bodies have such ancient wisdom that has been passed down to us. We were talking about how the body stores that information for survival, and so when we're getting fed that negative information about our food and our body image, and with activity, it's that body, you're storing that, and you're using that in how you treat yourself and other people.
Yeah, when you're constantly being told that everything that you do naturally, everything that comes to you is like, oh, this is a normal, natural thing to do. When you're constantly being told that's wrong, you get to the point where you don't believe yourself about anything. And this has happened to me in so many different instances, and I've heard so many different versions of the same thing from clients. Like, even, let's say you say something in African American vernacular English, and I only have one American parent, so it's not even like I do it constantly. But the times I have done it, had people act like, oh, it's so strange, it's so incorrect, that's so wrong, and I'm like, oh, I thought everybody said that. Just to constantly have that experience as a child, that you and your people do not know anything. You don't even know how to feed yourselves. That's the message we keep receiving through public health, or even constantly being told like, oh yeah, so you say your people have eaten rice for 1,000 years. It's unacceptable. You need to fully assimilate your diet. Then and only then will you achieve, a worthy health outcome. It makes you feel like, wow, I really can't trust myself, and I can't trust the information I've been raised with. But we have to learn to question, where are these assumptions coming from? Like, maybe your provider is just ignorant to the fact that when they went to school, all of the food that was listed for specific health problems, everything came from a very Eurocentric perspective. And when we think about food science in the US in particular, this field is only like 100 years old. And you think of how old other wisdom systems are that talk about how to take care of the body. Only white supremacy delusion would make you think that something that's 100 years old is head and shoulders above something that's thousands of years old and been working for lots of people.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways to do everything, and bodies really are individual. So in science in general, we're looking for what is true for most people, but you can't determine what's true for every single person. I mean, I've known people who didn't start their cycle for years and years and years, and they just were put on birth control to start their cycle. No one ever checked to see if they had ovaries and a uterus. And years after taking all that birth control, someone finally checked, and they were like, oh, that's why you're not having one. Okay. Or someone keeps being told that they can't really sense their heartbeat. It sounds really weak. We think something's wrong with you. You find out it's on the opposite side of the body from the typical person. There is nothing wrong with that. It is just different. We cannot assume that every single human body is going to respond to things the same way. So even when people make general recommendations that are usually true, it may not be true for everyone. So a high fiber diet that's full of fruits and vegetables, that's great for me. But for people who have a ton of GI issues, who maybe have IBS or Crohn's, that is not usually going to be the way that they need to go. So teaching people that your body can be trusted, and that when you get a provider that I would say is trustworthy, that provider relies on you and what signals you're getting from your body to try and discern what the next step is. If you get a provider who doesn't want to know anything about what you've been noticing, that's a real problem, because your patient is such a resource for information. And just ignoring that, if you're just going to give them a bunch of generic stuff, why didn't they just Google it? Why do they even bother coming in to see you?
I don't know if you've ever gone to the doctor about something. They go in their little thing, they pull out the little papers from the little file and thing, like, here you go, here's some papers on blah, blah, blah. And I'm like,
You could have Googled that.
No, thanks.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't work for me. And you're talking about the high fiber, like all of that. And thinking about like how colonization forced us to believe that our medicine and our foods were bad and we had to eat like them, and thinking about how the US did that to Puerto Rico, would go down there and be like, these are the foods that you need to eat, which was mostly processed eggs and like, you know, vegetables and fruit that came in a can. And so like, they were like, we need to be more like Europe, we need to be more white, we need to be more American. These are the foods that we need to eat. And then later on, you know, a lot of healthy foods and like herbs and teas, different things being sold back to us with like a different packaging. And so I think we're getting off track a little bit about like what we were doing. But I wanted to, now we've been talking about so much about these are all the things that are happening, and these are the results of what chronic stress is, and that the point that we really wanted to make was that what you're feeling is valid. A lot of it is conditioning, a lot of it is decolonization, a lot of it is white supremacy internalized. And so we want to keep having conversations like this. We want to keep uplifting folks and encouraging people to get more information and more support and more community support. And so we wanted to talk about like, what can we do? We gave you all this information. We could talk about our lived experiences forever, but like, what can we do about it? Let's do it.
Honestly, there's so much. Understanding that your lived experience is right, period, full stop. And that something may be true for me and false for Genie, and that is okay. Knowing that what is going to make you feel well is particular to you, and knowing that joy is an indicator that you're on the right track. Like, that's something we don't really hear often, that not only is the body trustworthy, but things that give the body pleasure, that's for a reason. So eating in the way that makes you feel the best is probably the best way for you to be eating. And while some of the things we talk about are just for the general population, like people who aren't dealing with a diagnosis that's nutrition related, a lot of times it applies to those folks as well. Because even if, let's say you have type 1 diabetes, if you are eating in the way that's not right for your individual body, you are gonna hear about it, and you're gonna hear about it pretty strongly from your body. Knowing that what makes you feel the best could be difficult to discern if you have a real disconnect from what your body is doing. So even if you've been taught, don't talk about your feelings, that can start to create a disconnect from what your body is telling you. Yeah. But then if you've experienced any kind of physical trauma where to survive, your body had to make you less sensitive, well, that's going to be another process to get through. Am I safe enough to feel my feelings? Am I going to be totally overwhelmed if I start trying to feel everything my body's telling me? So you have to think about your lived experience and whether or not you're going to need additional support if you're going to stop disassociating and start trying to feel what your body is telling you. And understand that literally everyone can do this. The question is, what will that process look like and how long will it take? And I know everyone can do it because at some point everyone did do it. Anyone who's ever seen a baby, babies, you would assume they don't know anything. However, they're born with a ton of information they inherited from the people before them. And you can see that babies know how much they want to eat. But the problem is most adults have been trained to not trust the body, and they're terrified that the baby won't get enough to eat. So you'll see the baby leaning back, trying to get away from the bottle, and you know their necks are a little floppy in the early days. But you can see, like, the baby is telling you they're done, and they're being taught before they can even vocalize, oh, don't listen to your body. You eat until the bottle is empty. And usually that training goes on and on and on, like having to clear your plate. I was so proud of myself today. I threw out, the portion was so big, but I threw out some French fries, and I was like, I'm doing it. Progress. Because most of us have been told you gotta clear your plate. If you're told, I would say before the age of 12, if you're told something repeatedly, that is stuck somewhere. And you may not realize it until you try and do something different, and you feel how deeply uncomfortable you get when you try and throw food away. I just think my mom's gonna like jump out from a bush somewhere and like smack me in the head. And obviously that's not a rational thought, but this is what happens when we're really young. We don't have a filter. We can't discern what information applies to me, what information maybe wouldn't be that great for me to hang on to. So what we're working through as adults is conditioning from the world around us, but also from our family. And sometimes not everything we were told is super helpful now, even if it came from a good place. So really trying to understand, what do you need to feel happy and complete? That is like step one to establishing what should be in your daily routine to take care of yourself. It isn't just about taking care of your physical body. It's your emotional experience. It's having meaningful work. It's being around people who make you feel supported and understood and loved. And then also understanding that it's not the end of the world, and it's not your fault if you don't have all those things at once, but that it can explain why you have like this feeling of general malaise because something's not quite right. And for the core needs, it's so interesting to me how different everybody's needs are. Some people just love to help other people so much that if they don't get an opportunity to feel like they're really making a difference in the lives of their loved ones, they're always going to feel like low energy or just kind of despondent. I don't have that. I feel like I mostly just need to get a ton of outdoor time, a lot of quiet time, and deep connection with sometimes a smaller group of people. Usually once I get over 6, I start having a meltdown, this introvert problems. So just respecting that we don't all need the same thing, and that's okay. And then also starting to experiment with things that you can do to start reconnecting to your body so that you can hear what it's telling you.
Is it okay if I...
Oh yeah, please.
Yeah, this was one of my favorite. I wanted to really, jump in here, especially with someone who's still. I will always have my eating disorder. It will always be a part of me because it started when I was about 3, and so it was a way that my body just knew, like, this is comforting. This makes me feel safe. I'm in control of this. This is something that I can control. And a part of the eating disorder wasn't about like, I need to buy healthier foods. I need to do the right, because a lot of this is not accessible as well for folks who have income sensitivities or just access to these quote unquote foods that we should be eating. But it's returning to the body in those moments, like we were talking about pleasure. And so a lot of times when binging or eating this food, it creates this instant gratification, right? And so for me, when I still have those tendencies, I know that I need to return to my body and listen. And listen, like, what do I need right now? What do I need? Returning to that body. And so trusting our bodies, going back to yourself and asking, like, what do I need in this moment? Do I need to eat this? Restricting myself, is that going to be helpful? And that can be really traumatizing. So it is about like just really listening, pausing for a second, because sometimes it's not that I need to eat something, it's that I need to connect with my body physically and do something. I need to self-soothe, right? I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling triggered. So just checking in with myself and pausing, just taking that one pause and being like, what do I need before reacting?
Yeah, and it can be a really brief pause. I mean, you can commit
Very
to
quick.
1 minute before you start eating. I love using eating as an entry point to mindfulness because it's something most of us do several times a day. Not that you have to eat in a disciplined way. The concept is it's just something that's already there that you can work with. Could you tack 1 minute on to however you eat and just see, like, how am I feeling right now? What do I feel like I need right now?
And what does your eating look like? I notice that too. Like in those moments of that I'm feeling triggered, am I being, the way that I'm doing it, am I rushing it? Am I feeling like I'm not connecting with what I'm doing? I'm already thinking about whatever I'm going to reach for next, right? And so it is pausing and listening to the body. And I love what you said, it doesn't have to be long. You don't have to go, as a neurodivergent person, I'm not silencing my mind. Like, I'm not doing that. That's not how meditation works for me, you know? And so, like, you don't have, when you, connecting with your body doesn't mean that you have to go off and do a 20-minute meditation on how you're feeling. It literally is just that one pause and to listen to yourself and look at how your body is, it takes over, right? And it does have a mind of its own, and it's doing like something that is survival. Like, I have to survive.
Right.
I'm in survival mode right now. I'm in, you know, so yeah, that 1 minute.
And being kind with yourself. If you listen for a minute and you're like, okay, I'm not getting anything, that's okay too. If you keep on doing it, and you don't have to do it at every meal, and you don't have to do it every day, but if it's just something that you keep revisiting, eventually something's gonna drop in. It's funny with the teeth grinding thing, and I've just learned that a lot of times when I'm wanting something really crunchy, I'm just angry. And I don't know why, my poor teeth, I've chipped so many teeth, but it's like being trained not to say anything and to swallow what you have to say as a child. That has come out for me as just chomping on things and, you know, cracking teeth on occasion. So it depends on the person what you're going to discover. You might find that when someone's been really rude to you or really mean to you, you desperately want something sweet with like a nice mouthfeel, something creamy, like for the food to be gentle with you. Maybe you're not like a rage teeth-breaking eater. Everybody is so different. You just have to look at it and see what's going on. And then you may still decide, like, oh, I understand I'm eating for an emotional reason. I'm going to do it anyway. That's fine. There's so many different reasons to eat. It's
so
not always just food.
And culturally, too, like gathering and celebration, that food doesn't have to be this enemy, and your body reacting that way is just like, hey, I need something, like, and I'm also just trying to protect us. Like, this is what we did to protect us, right? And so, like, reconditioning ourselves and really listening. And I love what you're signing here, like this self-acceptance.
Yeah, and it really is, it's a lot more work than sometimes people make it out to sound. Like, you see things, especially in like the generic wellness industry, it's always so, you can do it, girl, and like no one acknowledges
positive
it.
Affirmations.
There you go. Yeah, like you don't.
They
have
do work,
any
but
trauma.
I'm just saying, like, you should have Post-its everywhere. I'd be in the bathroom, like, you got this. Yes, it works, but I mean, like, what works for you? What works for you is what's going to serve you and what's going to work for you. What works for Dalia's might not work for me, but it's good that we're in community and we're talking about things. So like, hey, I'm struggling with this. Can you relate? What has worked for you? I'd love to try that. Go back. That didn't work for me, because now Dalia has this information to hand off to other people, and now I have this information. So as being in community like this is really important too, and to not be ashamed of your bodies and your behaviors, and understanding that you have been conditioned to be like this, and we are just trying to recondition, trying to decolonize.
Yeah, and it can really be a process. One thing that I've found really helpful and that I've passed on to other clients too is think about what you're still feeding yourself. I don't think we could ever go back to just how horrendous the media was that we were all consuming, like in the 90s, just the rape culture, the homophobia, disgusting. But we were too young to know any better. We just sat there absorbing it all. But there's still so much toxic foolishness from the TERFs. I am so done with the TERFs. And all of these people who think that somehow people's identities are debatable, and that people's identities somehow can be a punchline at times and that be acceptable. Mm-hmm. You know, people's gender expression is not a joke. It's not funny. Like, I don't get the humor. And I hope eventually we'll be to a point where everybody's like, I don't get it. Why is that supposed to be funny? Like, you think about all the horrific racial jokes that you used to hear in the 90s. And now people are like, I don't get it. Where's the punchline? But making sure you're shielding yourself from that and pushing yourself a little bit. It doesn't have to be harsh. I always am pro like being gentle with yourself. But have you noticed that your social media feed is all thin people? It's all fair-skinned people. And everybody does this, not just people who look that way, because we've all been conditioned to prefer straight hair, light skin.
Because the more we hate ourselves, the more money we're making for other people. And I do like a whole decolonizing social media workshop in different schools, especially with youth, and about like we have control over what we're seeing in social media. It's one thing I know that the algorithm is definitely about like, what do you hate about yourselves? Here you go, so you can buy more. You can definitely decolonize that too. What you are viewing, what are you searching, what are you spending time looking at, what are you resharing, what are you listening to, what are you reading? A lot of the music that I liked, especially like in hip hop, was very, very violent towards women, extremely homophobic, and I had to like, I'm still struggling with that because there's songs that get me so hype, and I'm like, this is not consensual, this doesn't feel safe, and I be in there like, and it's not, like it's very harmful, so I'm still working on that and decolonizing what I'm absorbing, because it's not just food, it's not just medicine, it's not just, wellness is everything that we are feeding ourselves, our, you know, music, books, social media, friends, people, environments, where we're shopping, what are we buying, so it's a lot of work, but it's worth it. I'm still working on it.
Well, it feels like, for me, it feels like it gets easier the more all in you go. Like the more you spread out the areas in your life where you're trying to pursue it. And you can approach it with a curious attitude. You don't have to feel bad about the things you used to believe. You don't have to feel bad, like, if you remember, like, oh, I said, oh, mejorando la raza to somebody. Like, if that pops up when you read it in the book, you're like, okay, that was a thing that a lot of people said. You don't have to beat yourself up. We're just trying to move forward. When you know better, you know, that's your opportunity to do better. And it's not just for yourself, it's for everybody in your community, for the children you're around. It's for everyone. I think a lot about what it means to me to be a good ancestor, and that helps with the motivation.
I was just saying that back there. We were nervous back there, and we were like, no, we're doing this for our ancestors. Like, we're having these conversations. We're doing this for little Dalia and little Genie, and we were like, let's go. It was like so much empowerment.
It really helps. And you have to know yourself to know what's going to be really meaningful to you, because what motivates us maybe doesn't motivate other people. But for me, the minute the ancestors are involved, I'm like, let's do it. So that always works for me. Now, these are some of these embodiment exercises are so fun. I love these because I feel like so many people make healing work look so serious and so hard all the time, but a lot of times it can look like play. So some of these, like even blowing bubbles, you'll know there's some adults out there who have so much equipment for their bubble blowing, but it really does help. Anytime you change the way that you're breathing, that could be a nice signal to your nervous system that at this moment we're okay.
So hype over bubbles,
they lose their minds.
Like we still
but
need
the
to
adults
be like
do
that.
It too.
Yeah, I'm like just watching them sometimes. I'm like, bubbles are really dope. Like they're just beautiful. They're just out here floating, just doing their thing, and they're like, and they're just like.
I did a health fair this summer, and I was like, if these adults don't stop taking the bubbles away from their children, because it is a really.
It's like my turn. You're like, no.
Yeah, they're like, I'm showing you don't know how to do it.
Let me do it.
Yeah, that's what everybody said. But imagine if you were really in a bad situation, like you were trying to run away from a lion or something. That would not be the time to be changing the way you breathe. You need to keep on like doing those rapid, shallow breaths.
Then you're in fight or flight.
Right.
Go.
So when you change the way you're breathing, that's a signal to your body that like, oh, we're actually not in trouble right now. We can relax right now. Because sometimes you can't get yourself to a more balanced state just thinking about it. But if you change something your body is doing, then the communication goes in the opposite direction, and your body will tell your mind, like, we're actually okay right now. We don't have to have our head on a swivel. So if you're hanging out with your, probably other grown-ups, let's be real, blowing bubbles, you know that this is not a dangerous situation you're in. But the sighing, I love that you included the sigh. Because it's something you naturally do, and it really makes a difference when you're feeling distress. Just make the sigh just as loud as you want to be. And I know culturally we typically read that as rude because it sounds like exasperation, but you can go to the bathroom and sigh deeply if you need to at work, or maybe just sigh in front of the person. That will also let them know
okay, I'm
you're stressing me
exasperated.
out.
Less.
Yeah.
Read the room.
It really makes a difference. And also doing things like inverting your legs. So when would you be in trouble and it would be okay for you to take the time to put your legs up on a wall? Never. So you can think some of these through on your own. Now the belly rolls, that's a fun one. I took belly dancing for half a second, and I will not make anybody watch me demonstrate that. But the amount of concentration it takes to isolate those muscles, and then it also feels like it's something fun, it's something you don't do all the time. So these are all exercises that help you reconnect to the body and could help bring down, basically bring your nervous system out of that fight, flight state to, hey, we're okay right now. We don't have to be hypervigilant.
Yeah. I do want to make another point on the playing. I emphasize play, especially as a creative person as well. And when I'm working with other creatives, like the reason why we have all this stagnant energy is because we're not playing enough. Like our creativity has become something that is very about producing something for other people. And kids, they're just playing there and enjoying themselves. They're just happy most of the times, right? Until someone comes and takes that from them or interrupts their environment. And now we've been trained to be like, no, your worth comes from the output. And so I truly believe in play and allowing yourself to have that pleasure, because a lot of times when we're looking for outsourcing things that might be harmful to us, it's to seek that pleasure, to seek that escape from what we're feeling. And so I really enjoy embodiment exercises and movements that feel like play, that don't feel like shaming you. For so long, me being neurodivergent and not feeling like I was meditating the right way, and being like, no, there's so many ways to connect through meditation that don't have to require me to sit a certain way, which is not accessible for everyone, and to silence the mind. I think being really gentle and doing things that feel good for you.
Right, and that agree with your body. So even if you read something that says, oh, this exercise or whatever needs to be done with a perfectly erect spine, blah, 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 don't give yourself permission to modify literally everything. Mm-hmm. You are grown. You can do what you want to do. There are so many different ways to do almost everything. Even with the meditation and the mindfulness, it does not have to be about attempting to control every thought or track every thought or keep bringing your mind back to what you originally focused on. There's lots of active, moving forms of mindfulness that you can do. And even you look at certain cultures, look at what they do to have transcendental experiences. So a lot of indigenous cultures, it may be some kind of plant medicine or something that's typically used for those experiences, but you'll also find a lot of people use intense dancing or intense drumming. And if you think you're not going to go into a trance state if you get a djembe and you learn, I'm so bad at it. But anyway, but it's so fun, and you will absolutely lose track of time. And sometimes intense dancing even feels like, oh, my body it's just, I'm in another place. Mm-hmm. So there's so many different ways to do it. Some cultures prefer certain things, but if you're a person that believes that all human beings are equal, then why would you just value how one culture does it over everybody else's? With globalization at this point, you can go on and borrow if that's what you need to do. I still recommend checking first with what your people probably used to do. But
don't bottle it up and try to sell it to people either. That's not yours.
Yeah, your ancestors might come get you for that. I don't know. Then with the breath work, there's so many different ways that could look. And really active breath work sometimes is easier for neurodivergent people because it gives you something to do and it feels active. And also, remember, you don't have to do it for a set amount of time. A lot of the numbers that are floating around out there about how long you should be doing these things, no, you need to do it how long feels right for you. The EFT and tapping, I love this one because it's proven to be effective for most people. and it doesn't cost anything. And so you can Google that. What I would prefer you do is subscribe to my YouTube channel, and then I will make sure to make more videos about it. But that is just tapping on a series of acupressure points. And some people will think about a specific thought or feeling they want to feel less intensely, and they do the tapping. But sometimes people can't find the words for what they're feeling and what they want to change. But it's been proven to be effective even when you can't really pinpoint it. It's like you said with the affirmations. You know, there are a lot of people who say you should just keep saying what you wish were true. But if there's a massive gap between how you want to feel and how you actually feel, your brain's probably going to be like, yeah, but that's not true. Yeah. So you may have to change it to something like, well, every day I'm learning more and more how to accept myself, instead of I totally love and accept myself. Because I've seen some people immediately get so upset just trying to say the words, I love myself. Yeah. And that is alarming. I know when I used to try to do mirror work in therapy, where you're saying it to yourself in a mirror, I was like, oh boy, this is a bad sign. I'm like, if I immediately feel like crying when I try and say, I love you, it's like, oh boy, we got a long ways to go. But so many people experience that. You can modify it.
Yeah, definitely, especially with tapping. For me, I have a sensory disorder, and tapping does not, I don't like it. It makes me feel uncomfortable. So I find that and also with the words, right? Like, because my therapist will be like, what are your affirmations? I'm like, I don't know, I'm stressed. I don't want to think about that right now. And it helps when someone can help you with that affirmation building. Like, if you're listening, if a friend or someone that you trust, listen out loud, and maybe they can do it for you and be like, does this feel okay? Does this resonate with you? Based off of what you were saying, this is what came up. But I also find that, like, rocking feels really good for me, and humming, like, you know, just like feels really nice in rhythm of what I'm doing, because sometimes tapping can feel like it's too much for me. But I love that, like, creating the sensory in your body of
a lot of the stimming that people do.
Yeah,
I say take notes, because a lot of those are good ones.
Yeah, I noticed that I would like rub my hand in here, like since I was little. I'm like, oh, that's me. I didn't realize that this is me, like just trying to comfort myself, or raising my arm up. I'd be like just laying down, like just by myself, raising my hand. I'm like, what am I doing? But it's regulating my nervous system, right?
Yeah.
But even up here, like, Dalia, you're so poised, and I'm like touching and but I'm like, that's okay. Like, I'm neurodivergent, and I don't have to stay still. And I'm sorry if I'm distracting you, but that's what I do.
Well, I think it's a good thing to model for everyone, that even that belief that if you're not neurotypical, you have to suppress it. Says who? Says who? As I'm hoping to see, as more people understand that there's a lot of neurodivergent folks, and we won't be so weird about people stemming, and then maybe we'll also start experimenting and be like, you know what? I feel better.
Yeah, and I think no matter how you identify or what's going on, I think the body naturally wants to soothe itself, right? And so it's just finding safe ways that feel good for you.
Absolutely. I feel like James is probably letting us know it's time to get to Q&A.
So yeah, we wanted to see if we could do just like a repetition with you during this time, and just kind of centering ourselves, and just a little check-in with your body and feeling that embodiment. This is something that I like to repeat to myself, especially in moments where I'm feeling like imposter syndrome, or feeling unworthy, or when I'm feeling triggered, and trying to understand when is it fight or flight response, trying to regulate that. And so with your permission, would it be okay if we did this chanting with you all to join, if you feel safe doing that? Yeah, I got 2 yeses. All right, the 2 of us, let's do it. All right, cool. All right, so let's do that breathing again. Yeah, and breathe in through your nose if you can, or your mouth, whatever feels good for you. Filling up your belly if you can. If sighing feels good for you, do that 2 more times. What I like to do on this is I like to take a deep breath. I'll just do the first line, and I am here. I am safe. I am loved. I am protected. Or we can do like a call and response if that feels better for folks, especially if you're new to breath work, or, we can do a call and response as well, and I can start and you can do that. So while you're taking your breath in, I'll say it first and then you can go, okay? So on 3, you guys will take a deep breath in. Ready? 1, 2, 3. I am here.
I am here.
Nice. In. I am safe. Ooh. In. I am loved. Ooh. In. I am protected. Yeah, let's do that again. Take it in. I am here. And I am safe. In. I am loved. Fill up that belly. I am protected. Yes. Doesn't that feels nice for me. Like I feel immediately like, yeah, like I've told my body, like, we are safe. You're listening to me. We are protected.
That really makes a difference for me. I can feel it immediately. And something that was helpful for me to hear when a lot of us were so stressed out in 2020 was that we're not children anymore. There's a part of us that always feels like we need someone to come rescue us when something goes off the rails. But the truth of the matter is, you can wait until things go off the rails, and you know what to do. So you don't have to constantly be in fear that something's about to go wrong. Because we know whenever we gather, whenever folks of color gather, whenever queer folks gather, and you live in a country where there's just weapons everywhere, that sometimes you do feel like a sitting duck. But if something went sideways, we would know what to do, or we would do the best we can in the moment. We don't need to constantly be at that level of hypervigilance. You can just wait until something goes sideways and try and address it then. When we're in that calm state, we have more access to all the wonderful things your brain can do. And so you have more problem-solving tools at your disposal when you're in that relaxed state. So that's been something that's been really helpful for me to remember.
I don't know if y'all saw the show on Hulu, The Other Black Girl. I love it. And something that one of the characters said was, you don't see white folks and folks with money walking around just angry all the time and being hypervigilant. And what if we weren't like that? What if we didn't feel those ways of all the things that we could accomplish? The way our lives would be different, right? And so we have been conditioned to carry this around with us, right? But it's up to us to release some of that. And that it doesn't mean ignoring that the things that are happening aren't happening, right? Because they are, and that we do live in a society where we do have to be hypervigilant, right? But it's also just like connecting with our bodies and knowing how to take care of ourselves, how to trust each other, how to be in community and feeling that safety. Because I do feel like we can accomplish wellness and to live healthy lives.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sitting with those two things at once, because it is kind of it feels like a dichotomy there.
Yeah, so this is how y'all can connect with us if you want to take pictures of this. And I promise you, like I am a huge fan of Dalia's, and I'm so happy that this happened because I read your book, and then I went on your website, and I was like, I'm going to contact Dalia, and had, you approved an appointment with me. I think it was probably for a consultation, but I was just like, how did you write this book, and how did you get there? Because I was searching for a way to connect with community and other folks that were doing this work so that we could build bigger communities and have this information available to folks. And then you recommended the coaching academy that I went to, and then I came up with this idea. I've been wanting to do this for a while. If you ask James, I was pitching this for about 2 years before it was like really ready. And then I was like, I'm gonna bring Dalia here. And if you have worked with me in workshops, if you are a client, I do recommend this book, Decolonizing Wellness, and Dalia's podcast is amazing as well. And I find deep comfort in listening to it and feeling visible, and that there are folks who are doing this work. There are providers who are providing healthcare that feels safe. There are folks that are in the wellness industry that, are doing this work. But I think at the end of the day, even if someone says to you, this is a safe space, only you get to determine if this is a safe space. Only you get to determine what safety feels like for you. And so I think at the end of the day, it's advocating for yourself no matter who you're seeing. I just saw a question about a provider. So I think it's like you deciding who feels safe for you, what feels safe for you, and you taking up that space the way that you need to.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, this is how you can follow us.
Yeah, I'm around. This was a great suggestion. Jeannie said, put the email out there. I'm easily accessible. I was glad you made the appointment. I'm so bad at sales. I was like, I don't know where this call is going. I'm just going to show up.
I was like, I just want to know you and be in community with you. But I'm so grateful that this happened. And it does feel like this was supposed to happen. And that bringing you here has been such a gift. And thank you to the Museum of Science for making this happen, and James for your continuous support and community and providing this platform for us to have these conversations. And for you all coming as well and being here and wanting to be in community with us. And I think that the way the rest of the night is going to go is James is going to come up in here. There is live music. I was going to perform tonight, but like I said, I'm getting over a cold, and y'all did not want to hear me sing tonight. But my beautiful friend Jasmine Red is going to perform, and my dear friend Bella B is also going to be DJing, and that will be your opportunity to talk to Dalia and I. We do need some time to decompress and to center our bodies as well. So if you could speak with us after Jasmine's performance, we'd really appreciate that. And Dalia will have Dalia's book for sale and for signatures. And I feel like I'm just saying questions. If you have questions, you can go on Slido, which is there. I did not see it, the second line, because my neurodivergent, I read like 3 of the words, and then I figure it out what it is. But if you go to slido.com, and if you have a question, you can use code #wellness and put it there. And I'm going to read, James, do we have time? Just 2. All right, I'll read one from here. Okay, do either of you have any green flags we should look out for in search for healthcare providers?
I've been really appreciating lately people explicitly stating on their website where they stand with health equity issues and social justice issues. There could still be somebody problematic in there, but that I think is at least a sign that you had the good sense to know people who chronically feel unsafe in healthcare settings, you need to come right out and say that you've made an effort. Even better if you tell us what that effort means, like how often these trainings are going on, or letting us know in advance on the website, like there will be weight inclusive seating in the lobby. We're not going to say men can't have babies if you're a trans birthing parent. Like, let us know what that really means. What can I expect from you before I even get there?
I know that I love inclusivetherapists.com in search of mental health support. I wish there was more of that for other healthcare providers. But I think another thing that I've been thinking about with my own crises that have been happening in the last few months is that in those moments where you need to find someone quickly, when you have a dislocated elbow or you have this type of illness or injury that you need help right away, is having someone with you to advocate for you in those spaces and to ask those questions, having a conversation before, because for me, when I go into healthcare settings, I immediately get triggered and really tense. And so it's nice to have someone there that can remember what the person is telling me, ask those questions that I wanted to ask. So I know that wasn't really for providers, but when you're going into those spaces, having that support.
It's helpful too if someone can clearly say, especially if it's like a smaller practice, maybe it's like one provider, if they can say they have specialized training in some of the concerns you're going to them for.
I didn't see anything on the Slido. Was it supposed to be here? Unless no one used it, that's fine too. I don't see it on this side. This side? How do I know which one is from Slido? Yay, I thought this was from virtually. I'm sorry, y'all. Oh, sad. All right, doctors, we did that one. Dalia, you mentioned generational trauma and looking back 2 generations. If our ancestors are past and never talked about these things, how can we communicate our ideas behind our trauma and bodily responses? You want to read that? You can, because me, I would have been like, no, I don't know what you just said. It's the second one.
It's the second one, okay.
I think while you're reading it, I can, if that's okay. I know they asked for Dalia, but I think for me was doing my own research on where I came from. I did a 23andMe and found out my ancestral that way because my birth mother was not a reliable source for that. And so I needed to find out on my own, and then just kind of like researching the people that came from that area. Finding out my mom was Irish was a big surprise to me, and so I was like, oh, so I want to visit that space if I can, and I want to learn more about that. And listening to my body as well, like I always had dreams about Ireland and the type of magic that they were doing, and so also getting in touch with that.
Yeah, I think it can be really helpful to understand that even if you don't know exactly where something's coming from, that doesn't make it any less real or legitimate, and that you can check with other members of the community who maybe have an idea about what people were being put through at the time. It may not be specific to your family, but it could really give you an idea. And then you have to remember too, depending on who you're talking to, it may be so difficult for them to talk about, they're not going to want to. I know my dad was in high school when they integrated in our town, and he is a very gregarious person. He's a storyteller. He's never talked about it. That tells me how bad it was. And my great-grandmother, who was originally from Georgia, just wouldn't talk about anything. And that right there was an indicator that the grief was too intense for them to want to revisit it.
And I think with the Taino people of Puerto Rico as well, like it's been a struggle to find this information because there was erasure. And so it is really new, like we're putting together our language again, we're putting together the pieces, and when you Google Taino, it says extinct, but we are not, because I'm sitting here with my big percentage, like out here thriving and learning my ancestral ways. And so even if there is erasure, the information is there, but a lot of the time it is through the colonial lens, and a lot of what we know has been through the colonial journals and letters and all of that. And so I think like talking to each other, also if you are Taino, the local tribes here in Massachusetts have been so accepting and so loving to the Taino people and understanding and welcoming us into their circles and their celebrations. So that has been really beautiful as well. So if you can't find your information on yourself, I think just being around other Indigenous folks or other folks that are close to your ancestral lineage can be really, really beneficial and just soothing.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, because the tactics that people use whenever they're committing genocide or trying to take over a land and displace a people is so similar, sometimes just connecting to other folks with a similar history could give you a lot of hints about where some of your sensitivities are coming from. And I know for me, I'm a fan of the BIPOC umbrella because of how much folks have in common, because of these violent experiences our folks have gone through. But I know some people aren't as excited about the umbrella, but I don't think it's about erasure. It's about sharing, hey, when humans go through ... we tend to have a lot of the same symptoms.
Can we take a selfie with y'all real quick?